Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily, featuring a conversation with composer Steve Pardo about his music for the game Cypher 007. Cypher 007 is an isometric stealth adventure game on Apple Arcade where you relive some of James Bond's iconic memories. And Steve got to use the main Bond theme that everyone is so familiar with over the last, 6 decades or so. And you would hear that in the audio version. You don't hear the music in this video version of Level with Emily, but I would highly recommend the audio version just to hear what Steve wrote. It's so good. Originally, I planned to take out my opening banter. I like to start with the guest right away after these rambly intros, but it just made sense to leave that in, so you'll hear my first experience with Steve's music for Cypher 007, which kind of made me laugh, and it made him laugh too, when we get started in just a moment. Sam and I are going to take a little bit of a break next week. We'll be back on, I think it's November 10th. I can't quite remember right off the top of my head right now. Join us on Discord. That link is down in the show notes. Subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss our interviews. And if you can help us out on Patreon, support us financially there at patreon.com/level. All right, here is my conversation with Steve Pardo about his music for Cypher 007. What was funny is that literally I did not pay attention to what soundtrack you sent me.
Oh, wow.
I did in the coming weeks, but when you initially sent it to me, a month ago, I was just like, oh, great, Steve, more music from Steve. Sweet. We'll put him on the calendar. Don't care what it is,
Cool.
And so then you sent me the link to the SoundCloud. And so I was driving to work one morning and I'm like, oh, cool. I'll listen to Steve's music.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this sounds like James Bond. And then this, and then the second track starts and I'm like, is this some kind of homage? And then I'm like, no, this is definitely a James Bond game, Emily.
I'm literally playing the James Bond theme. Yeah.
James Bond game. So that was just hilarious how I could miss that, that pay that little attention and just only be like, yes, new Steve Pardo, So that was really funny.
It's good to know that even right off the bat, you were like, I'm pretty sure this is James Bond. And then it was made very clear. But it's good to know that you were already leaning that way.
I was leaning that way. And that's because it's fantastic. And I don't want to spoil all the things I loved about it quite yet. But why don't you just go ahead and introduce the game?
Sure.
And, we'll go from there.
Well, like you spoiled it for everybody, it is a James Bond game. I think they've seen the title. They've probably gotten it by this point. But Cypher 007 is the title. It's on Apple Arcade. I'm playing it on my iPhone. It's fun on all the Apple places, iPad and Apple TV. And it was made for the Apple ecosystem. So hyper optimized, for that platform. The controls feel so great. All the Apple Arcade, Apple ecosystem pluses are there, but it's mainly like an homage to James Bond as a film franchise, as, the characters that we love, the locations that we love. It's about that, and trying to present that in a way that's fun for on-the-go play. So, when I first got brought onto the project by my friend Caitlin, who is the senior producer there at Tilting Point, it was co-developed by Tilting Point and a Swedish developer, Pixelbyte. Pixelbyte is made famous from their award-winning game series Space Marshals, which is also iOS first, kind of, top-down, casual, but awesome and fun and intense shooter games, spy kind of games. So when Tilting Point and Pixelbyte merged, it made a whole ton of. They didn't merge, they brought on Pixelbyte as the developers. It made so much sense because they already had made this awesome engine for this type of game. That was the game we're making, and we were already inspired by the Space Marshals game. So it was just awesome to kind of get in the weeds with those guys and. Kind of make the best kind of game that we wanted to make anyway with this franchise.
Yeah, oh, go on, keep going. Yeah,
sure. So that's effectively it. The concept of the game is classic James Bond as you know him in classic environments, fighting classic baddies, but presented in a way that like, okay, how are we going to make this work? And so it's got a brand new story, very dreamlike, very modern in that way. Like it's not like an old school retro game. It's a new modern game. So we're tying the old with the new. And then where do I fit in? Like I'm a jazz musician, saxophone player. You know me from the Signs of the Sojourner soundtrack. So trying to like fit in my musical language with the Bond musical language, as you would assume, was a challenge in and of itself. Like, how do I fit in here? What does the game need? So there's a lot of stuff that needed consideration just to tie it all together. But like immediately when Caitlin brought us on, we were like, this is going to be so much fun. There's no way this isn't going to be so much fun to work on.
Yeah. What was it like when you found out that it was Bond and that you'd be doing music for a Bond, like a legit Bond situation? I had a proper freak out
because I've been a lifelong Bond fan for sure. Maybe not lifelong, but like it all started with GoldenEye 007 on N64. Me and my friends, that's still our main game. Like that we play whenever we think about what are we going to play together, we're the first thing that comes up is GoldenEye for N64. And it's like by now those controls are mad outdated and there are so many better multiplayer couch co-op-y kind of games to play, but that's still the game that we all like. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA. And so, the musical language of that was the first thing that popped into my head. I'm like, of course, like, oh, we get to do that kind of retro sound. People are going to love that. I could not be farther off from what the game needed and what the original design was. Like that idea of N64 GoldenEye was not on the table at all. So it was nice to kind of like not have to try and live up to that, that culturally. It's also, it was such a big moment, that game, when it came out for my generation, especially just like the first time, like a real first-person shooter on a Nintendo console. What? And it's James Bond. But the films too. I think that like the Pierce Brosnan films, I watched those in the theaters when they came out, and then all the Daniel Craig films are so amazing. And then it wasn't actually until recently that I went back, and this is before I got asked to do this project. I watched all the Sean Connery Bonds.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So I've never seen a Roger Moore one, and
really?
And any of the ones. No, I think I've maybe seen them in passing, but when I got asked to do the projects, I'd only seen the Sean Connery ones, the Pierce Brosnan ones, and the Daniel Craig ones. So I've seen all of those, and everyone in the middle. Sorry, I just hit my mic. All the ones in the middle, I completely skipped, which was great for this project, honestly, because like those. The film. Specifically, what was it? Specifically, You Only Live Twice was a big inspiration for the second chapter. So that was relevant, that I needed to know that one. But besides that, it was all about Sean Connery and all about Daniel Craig and a little bit of that modern stuff in the Pierce Brosnan film. So having cultural musical awareness of those two eras was like minimum viable awareness for going into this project. I don't want to say I shouldn't have watched the other movies, but time is of the essence, and I think I felt like I knew what this game needed in order to. At least I was aware of what this game needed in order for us to like get started and get rolling.
Yeah. So, the main theme is so iconic, and it's been in every single film.
Yes.
Except one of the Daniel Craig films, they used it at the end instead, which I think is a little blasphemous, but whatever. It's a whole,
fair enough.
Only because it's the beginning. That's how Bond films start, and I love how in those early years, John Barry was like, okay, but we're going to do this song first, and then we're going to go into, which is really cool. So just all these really creative ways to implement the theme. And that's one of the things I loved about your soundtrack, too, is just independent of the title theme, of course, just all the little snippets of melody you use throughout in whether it's the creeping around stealthy music or combat. So just talk to me about that theme itself, if you would.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that we had that theme to play with. I don't think we could have done this game or any Bond anything can exist without that theme. It is I think it's the most iconic film theme. Except for maybe Star Wars or something. It's up there for at least arguably in the top 5 for sure. And
absolutely.
And to get to play with that it was sort of a requirement. I think I wouldn't have been able to do it, but it wouldn't have been as Bondy. People would have been upset, understandably. So the fact that we got that right away, that was part of the initial discussions. Was like, phew, okay, good. Yeah. We got the heart. We figured out the hardest part of all this is nailing doing the IP the justice it deserves. So. Yeah. I knew we wanted to incorporate that into the theme somehow, but I sort of took it as a personal challenge to re-record the original Monty Norman / John Barry, their version. There have been other versions,
yes,
but their version of the James Bond theme, the quintessential. Dr. No. Yeah. So it's not like we couldn't have used the original Dr. No one, but it would have felt out of place. So but I still wanted that version because it's quintessential Bond. Yeah. So I literally just transcribed it from their recording.
Oh, really?
Yep, I just transcribed it, all the parts.
Interesting.
And we recorded as note for note as I could possibly hear.
There's no arrangement of it out there? I mean,
if
just transcribing is time consuming.
If there is, actually it wasn't. I know that piece of music the back of my hand.
It's not like Stravinsky or something.
Absolutely. It's just a bunch of minor 6 chords, it's nothing. It's a lot of unison in a bunch of minor 6 chords. So
it's true. It's true. Yeah.
But and then, what was I going to say?
I'm sorry, I derailed you there.
No. Just
re-recording the main theme.
Yes. So I knew we wanted it to be classy, but have the same ensemble that the rest of the game has, so it doesn't feel overly large. Like some of the newer renditions do, and overly vintage, like the original John Barry one has. So it's somewhere in the middle. Okay, it's representative of this game.
Yeah.
And the ensemble that makes up most of the tracks in this, most of the pieces here, and has the sort of the same studio production quality. So it just all fits together, Mm-hmm. But you can tell this one for sure is dialed up a little bit hotter to kind of give it that tapey saturation thing, So we spent a lot of time just dialing that in and getting it feel brassy and hot and. Yeah, have all of that sparkle and tape saturation, while not going overboard. I think we delivered a few mixes to Eon early that were pretty over the top. Can you dial it? Can you just reel it in, please? Just do another. They were a little upset. I'm like, yes, of course. We'll just turn it down. Literally turn it down before it hits the compressor. And that was all we needed. But that was a lot of fun getting to record that. The brass section just totally destroyed it.
Did you do 5 trumpets? What did you do? 4 trumpets, 4 trombones? What did you do?
Well, we had a unique section. We had 3 trombones, 3 French horns, 3 trumpets.
Oh, French horns. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I knew I wanted French horns.
Yeah.
Primarily for the rest of the soundtrack, but then there were elements of the James Bond theme that I'm like, is that a in my head, I'm like, is that a trombone or is that a French horn? And then I just who cares? I'm recording it. I can do whatever I want. So
right.
And there, it was really fun to have effectively a jazz ensemble with and no saxophones and instead French horns. Thought that was I recorded saxophones. I overdubbed saxophones later.
Okay.
For those of you that don't know, I'm a saxophone player.
Yeah.
But having French horns there, as part of the brass section, kind of being in betweener, 1 on trombone part, what would have been a trombone part, and 2 on a trumpet part, or vice versa. It was just fun to play around with that. And man, I think that what is it? The Gil Evans ensemble, the Miles Davis stuff. That's sort of like in my blood too. Like I love that sound. I love hearing that. So have that be a part of the jazz ensemble portion of this was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it adds such an amazing timbre to the color, right? It just adds such a beautiful color and that you just can't get from trombones and trumpets, even if you combine them. Horn is just a unique weirdo.
Yeah, it's a glue. It's
a glue.
Melodic. It's expressive.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
When called upon, it is. Nothing beats it. I mean, like, I remember last time we talked together, or it was 2 times ago, we were raving about the clarinet, and now here we are raving about the French horn. It's French horn's turn in the spotlight.
Yeah. I love horn. Yeah. I ended up kind of going down, of course, a rat hole. I've, if people aren't super familiar with Bond, those early films were all done by the British composer John Barry, who is, Academy Award winning, Grammy winning composer of course. And I always loved John Barry. I mean, two of my favorite films growing up were Dances with Wolves and Out of Africa. So those are his two biggies, other than Bond, right? One could argue. And you can, of course, I'm like, well, surely somebody has put a supercut of all the Bond themes together. And so I just put that in the background one day. And it's so fun to just hear how they change. And then, as the singers come in.
It evolves. It's amazing.
It changes so much. And just such a rich fountain of musical color in
it
those.
Really is just music history in a way. You can see the change from studio orchestra to funk to disco to 80s synth pop to industrial to techno, and now all the way back to Adele, Sam Smith, Don't Say Radiohead, like I love the Radiohead cut track for what it's worth. That was a big inspiration for this soundtrack for sure. Yeah, really? I mean, I'm a huge Radiohead fan. Yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, you I don't want to say you should be, but that's a good well to tap as well, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for this type of game especially, I mean, like thinking about that history that you just brought up I mean, it was a little intimidating, I'll say. I mean, how could it not be? Just to be like, oh gosh, like there's Paul McCartney and then right next to Paul, Steve Pardo. Like that doesn't make sense. So thankfully it's a video game for Apple, so it's not the same, exactly the same situation. But nonetheless, trying to be inspired by those guys. And I mean, I wanted to initially, like, I was like, I'm going to do something completely different and do like an old school, like swinging Benny Goodman big band thing for this soundtrack, which is actually what the studio wanted. Like they were like, we want it to be jazzy.
Interesting.
I don't think that was it was just, as one of the Eon folk mentioned, they thought like some of my early sketches were too jazz hands. They like literally were like, Steve, it sounds jazz handsy. And I'm like, yeah, that's my guilty pleasure coming out a little bit too much there. I apologize.
Yeah.
So when we were like trying to find, all right, where is the inspiration really? It was really like in the more modern, like the Billie Eilish stuff. Her piece for the last film, which is just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Hans Zimmer, his take on the soundtrack for the last film was just one of my favorites. I couldn't get enough of it. And Billie Eilish's song, I thought just like the two of them worked so well together as a whole. And then, obviously the Radiohead piece, the Adele piece, the Sam Smith piece. I think like the trajectory of the last few songs and soundtracks, I think were like we wanted to, I think more as we went on, we more so wanted to live in that lane than to try and be like, too vintagey, too big band. There is like, a good amount of saxophone and alto flute and, frilliness going on that kind of is a hint, a callback to that stuff. And we can get into that with some of the specific tracks. But for the most part, I think that like that modern dreaminess and romanticism through like a modern take on texture and orchestration, I thought was like, okay, yeah, like it's in these pieces, it's in these films, and with these more modern day composers, and some of the songs that pair with the Bond films.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about some of the instrumentation decisions you did make then.
Yeah. So for the title theme Decipher, which that's the actual name of the song, Decipher, that plays on the main menu. When we got to doing that, I initially thought typically here there is lyrics. Typically there's a singer. And so the approach was, I'm going to write this as if it was a song with a singer. And I even wrote lyrics for it. That was just like to help me get there with a melody.
Yeah.
So it was just me on the Whirly, which is sitting right here next to me. And, just a really kind of simple song, slow and romantic. Romantic in my dry, dreamy, West Coast, West Coast jazz world, that kind of romantic.
Yeah.
But wanted to live in that, a similar space that I think the Signs of the Sojourner soundtrack lives in, where it's like, what instruments can I play? Like as much of like that live, performing on real instruments, that kind of inspires me to compose and to write music that way. Just like, all right, pick up this, play that, try a little part here, orchestrate that on a flute and pair it with, a bell or a synth bell or a high guitar chimey thing with an effects pedal on it. Like I sort of thrive in that headspace compositionally. Like when I'm writing, that's what I'm inherently doing. So I always start there, but then, okay, this is a James Bond soundtrack, like lush brass, lush small studio orchestra, string orchestra sound, like lots of unison, lots of like glissandos, and then like drummer on brushes, kind of like being moody. I'm a huge David Lynch fan, so I definitely wanted that, because one of the main story beats in this is there's what's called the mind trap, which is like Bond gets captured early on in the game, taken hostage, and he's put into this, like, they don't really tell you what it is, but it's a sort of machine-ish thing that forces Bond to live out his history, to live out his life through this hallucination. So you're basically, the entire game is you're playing his hallucinations. He doesn't know that, but you sort of find that out pretty soon, that none of this is real, none of this is really happening. It's all a dream. He's just re-experiencing all these things. So that dreaminess, I thought, like, right away when I wrote Decipher, I thought, like, well, let me just do a couple more takes of just some improv, and I'll reverse the entire take I just did, so that the sound of me improvising over this piece is being completely reversed as it goes. No other effects except for maybe some reverb, and that worked surprisingly well. I did a little chopping up so that I made sure that some of the chord scales aligned with the actual chord progression of the song. But besides that, it was like, oh, this was actually like pretty easy to do,
Wow.
like, and it didn't require like, I mean, I'm a jazz musician. I know how to like play some bebop lines on a keyboard. So I like literally in every piece of music in this soundtrack, there's me just like right hand soloing on the Whirly, and then I'm just hitting the reverse button.
Really?
Yeah. So that's like a big part of the soundtrack. Yeah.
That's
so yeah,
incredible.
to tie it all together, it's me playing all these instruments poorly around me, and then it's a lot of right hand reverse Whirly, and then mad props to, I mean, there's a ton of guitar. It's James Bond. A ton of guitar, a ton of like affected out, melodies and ambience. That's a whole nother podcast, just talking about my guitar and all that. But like,
what do you mean?
Just the effects.
Oh,
like,
okay, yeah.
Like how I just, get weird and mad scientist pedal tricks and all that. Every composer who loves to nerd about this stuff, so I'll save that for another time.
Yeah.
But like, a lot of, and then just tying that in with the brass and the strings and just trying to dial in on a mood whilst trying. I mean, again, like with so much history in this IP, like you kind of have to find, in my case at least, like what can I do that feels authentic to the game, to myself, and to this IP. And I thought like that merging eventually took shape. Like once the game started getting there too, like it found its identity with the Mind Trap and with pairing up with Pixel Bite. Like what there was a merging that happened right around that time, where the music and the game and the story all started to line up. And it was right around the time when I wrote Decipher, that piece of music.
Okay. And Decipher, again, that's the one that right when you load up the game, that's what you hear. And when you see the menu or the menu. And I just loved it. The
cool.
mood is really perfect. And the other thing I really liked about it is how warm it sounds. You know what I mean? It's just like, it just has a warm mix to it, I think.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad that came across. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
We wanted
and of course,
it to feel inviting and like, hint at something larger there. But yeah, and inevitably, like we also wanted you to just like it. Like I think, like I was hoping that you could hear the song and be like, okay, I like this.
Yes.
That's not always what I'm going. Surprisingly, that's not always what you like in a video game soundtrack. Sometimes you want it to be grating and like intense and
sure.
But for this piece of music, I was hoping that it would feel like nice.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it does. And then I heard a lot of cello too,
sure,
here and there. So and that was you, I assume. Yeah,
that was I typically outsource that, but I got inspired recently to purchase my own cello sitting behind me, as you can see.
Okay, there it is. Yeah,
and because there wasn't too cello melody on this, there are here and there, and when the cello is playing a melody, more likely than not, it's Caitlin Rates or one of the other fabulous cello players that we got during the session. But I'm playing a lot of just like ambience or just like little trills and I'm not a cellist by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a lot of fun like fiddling around with that throughout the soundtrack.
Did you try any new instruments for this soundtrack?
Gosh, that's a good question,
because it's such a traditional so I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't, but just
Yeah, like let me look around my room.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I did get a bass 6. Does that count as a new instrument?
Well, of course. Tell us about it. Yes, tell us all about it.
Yeah, the bass 6 is actually, I think McLean brought this up when he was talking about Firmament, I want to say. So it's making another appearance. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, it's a fabulous 60s kind of, twangy bass guitar hybrid, 6-string bass. So with this instrument being so, quintessentially 60s, I thought that it would make sense. And, I found one that wasn't too expensive and it gets a lot of showtime on this soundtrack. It doubles the main guitar part, which I played on a telly, which
I wondered about that.
Is not played on a telly.
Right.
It's typically played on kind of an old school archtop, but no, this, I got the sound and I got pretty close. It's not like the sound, but I thought it was close enough with the telly. I had a really fun time trying to like mic the amp and this room and try to get it like as close to that John Barry studio orchestra sound. And so I tried like 3 or 4 different mic positions. Eventually, all it was the room mic. Just like one, I think it was my Coles 4038, like just one Coles mic.
Wow.
Getting the room, and that was it. Like
amazing.
I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like that's probably how they recorded it.
It's true.
They probably weren't doing close miking back then, So
wow.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. No, but besides that, I mean a lot of alto flute.
Okay.
I think since Signs of the Sojourner, which is the last time we talked, I did get my Barry saxophone. So is that in the shot? I have a Barry saxophone.
Amazing. Yeah, you got to grab that. Kind of takes 2 hands, but yeah.
Yeah, here she is. This
is, look at that.
An old Busher.
I love it.
Which I got. Wow. I got it. It was in horrible, horrible condition.
Oh no, really?
But a buddy of mine here in town repairs saxophones, and he was
Okay.
like, he took the challenge. He was like, yeah, I got this. So he totally set it up from top to bottom, and it plays amazing. So yeah, it makes a feature on the James Bond thing, actually. So I'm playing it on there. Yep.
Is that a flugelhorn back there, or just a trumpet? I can't
That is
really
a cornet.
tell. Oh, it's a cornet. I could tell there was something weird about it, but from the distance, Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's. I do play some trumpet on this, but
really, okay.
This one needed the classy, first called Nashville horn section. So
especially for that main theme.
Less Steve trumpet on this one than in other spots. But I am playing some of the main string parts on Decipher.
Cool.
I think actually the melody I'm playing violin and cello on that one. I mean, we got the pros to like double it and sit, but there was something about the amateurs. it just had to sound bad. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean the folksy. Let's call it that. Like the folksy vibe worked really well with that like kind of gritty, like portamento kind of thing. Yeah. So it's sitting in there alongside David Davidson and a few others.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
Bloody Martini is the name of a track that is just such a great example of how there are just little snippets of the theme here and there. So talk about having that playground to play in.
Yeah, Bloody Martini is a good example of me trying to get over the fact that this was not GoldenEye 007, and people are going to be thinking about that pause track, when you have the watch on, or you like pull up the watch and you hear that sick hip hop, 90s. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, it's been memeified. It's like, it's in the cultural zeitgeist. So we actually, on the first delivery of that track, I mean, we don't have like a pause track, but we were like, this is the spot to do it. It's like, UI screen, they're going to be sitting on there for a while. Let's have our like Bond jam right there. So the first pass we did, I had Chris Wilson helping me on this one.
Do I know Chris Wilson?
Chris Wilson is a colleague of mine at Skew Sound.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we collaborate on just about everything.
Cool.
So this was the one piece where I'm like, Chris, I think you would nail this. It's like very well, like at least in the Bond, like GoldenEye, like when we were going down that direction, it was gonna be that. So I'm like, Chris, can you like deliver me the sickest, most awesome, or like homage to that? And he did, and it was amazing. Yeah. But then we put it in game, and it just wasn't like it was right. He nailed it. But for this game, it just didn't. It was like from a different soundtrack. So it'll get out there hopefully someday. But Chris's version of that. So this was just a piece that I wrote as like, okay, well, let's keep it in the Cypher sound. It still has that groove, like that. Brushes, call it hip hop. Brushes with a backbeat. Yeah. And then I got my friend Christian Barsvik, who is the lead alto player for the Airmen of Note.
Okay.
He was in town. We're really good friends, and he brought his flute, and he just like went to town. I just said, hey, improvise over this whole thing, and then I cut it up a little bit and put some delay on it. So
that's him on the flute in there.
Playing flute.
Oh, cool. Okay, because that stuff, I just loved all those touches too, just little flourishes here and there that,
cool.
Independent of the little theme flourishes, they're all these like improvised things dropped in there. And in that regard, I mean, that really is also in your DNA is improvisation and jazz and all of those things. And I mean, there's just... you were mentioning minor six chords, but there's an awful lot of major seven chords in here too. Like
yeah. Good ear. I am throwing in some like that chord shouldn't be there. Like that doesn't make sense, especially in the combat music.
Yeah,
I'm kind of like tricking you with like a random major seven chord that like. I'm honestly surprised that Eon didn't say something about that, but I think that I either just like was going by too fast or they had other things to think about. But like there's a harmonic language from in the jazz, New York jazz scene from like the early aughts. I'm thinking like Kurt Rosenwinkel, John Hollenbeck, Brad Meldau, where like there's some, I can't even like totally describe it. It kind of stems from that Wayne Shorter thing where like any chord can work if there's context, if there's melodic like tension and release that lends itself to it. And so I especially like with the combat sequences, I wanted like, I just, for some reason with the Traitor, I really wanted there to be like, I love the idea of like the Miles Davis jazz quintet from the 60s, like Tony Williams and Herbie, like the fast, like the fast Tony Williams ride cymbal with like Brad Mehldau playing right hand piano, like just fast, ridiculous stuff in odd times, like fast. And then there being like James Bond brass and James Bond strings. I just loved that as a concept. Yeah. So that's effectively what the Traitor is, and a bit of what the Escape is as well. Those are the two big combat, like big action sequences. Yeah. And then there's these like hidden, like you said, like, what's that chord doing there? That's the why is there an E major 7 on like a, you know, like it's a D minor piece of music, but there's an E major 7 randomly. It's there's something about that where it's just like, if you can find a way to make it work, it actually tells a bit of a story. Like, there's just like a little glimmer of hope or love or romanticism in the midst of turmoil. Yeah. That's what Bond is fighting for. So like, you know, I was able to, you know, justify it. Yes. That's how I get away with it. My stupid ideas. I try to justify it narratively.
Love that. Yeah. I think Escape, is that the one in 7? There's a
yep.
Yeah. So I mean, combat tracks are always great for those odd meters because you're supposed to be kind of off your game, right? You're just like a little bit. So talk about that.
Yeah. Again, like, you know, both of those pieces of music, the Traitor is like the bigger one. Escape is a little bit more driving and regular, if you will, even though they're both in 7. Yeah. But so the Escape is for, there's a couple sequences in the game. One of them is when you're like blowing up these, like, this is in like the tutorial even. You're blowing up these computer terminals that are going to explode, and you're going to, like, you know, you've been locked in and you got to kind of get your way out of there fast with a rocket launcher. And so, like, you know, time's running out, the clock's coming down. And so this piece of music is sort of that. I'm inspired by the sequence in Metroid at the end. I think it's the original Metroid and Super Metroid at the end when, like, you just beat the Mother Brain, you got to get out. So I love that kind of action sequence because it's not like there's a big boss. It's just, it's suspenseful, and you got to be on your toes. You got to move. You got to move now. Yeah. So like that's a little bit where the inspiration of, like, I mean, you know, as a jazz musician, I'm used to being on the stage as a saxophone player, and we're cooking it like 350 beats per minute. I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like, how am I supposed to play over at 350 beats a minute? I have to play 16th notes at 3. Like, no, but you do. Because it's survival. There's like there's an anxiety and like an adrenaline rush that you get from that. And so, like, I thought about that, and that's again like where that inspiration came from.
Love it.
But the Traitor is a little bit more of that conventional video game boss where it's like he's a big baddie. There's got to be some big nasty brass and monster just so it's a little bit more conventional in that way. It's a little bit more angular in that, you know, there's a multi-stage boss fight going on, so there's different sections that weave in and out. A little bit more harmonically complex.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just like, I love the idea, again, of like there being this traditional jazz ensemble cooking while there's like the main James Bond theme playing in the background, you know. There's not really like a specific Traitor or Escape theme. Just like, I thought that those two themes were strong enough to where, like, the player doesn't need a third theme for the boss battle. Yeah, so, yeah. It's really just playing with those motifs and, you know, cooking in a jazz ensemble while you're fighting Jaws, you know, trying to save the world.
Incredible. How much time did you...
Oh, I lost your audio.
Oh, sorry. My bad. I was just muted because I probably coughed or something. Yeah. How much time did you work on this?
Let's see. We started... Oh goodness, it's been a minute. It was I want to say mid 2021. Okay, is when we got brought in, and that was before we had Pixelbyte. So we were doing sketches pretty early on, and throwing them over to MGM and Eon to get their take on things.
Okay.
And, doing a lot of spec work because I also was the audio lead on the project. So,
okay.
So I was leading a team of a few sound designers, Jasmine Serrano, Matt Galt, and Nick Coleman, who's a colleague of mine at SKU Sound, also contributed to some of the sound design. But
okay.
And we thought we were going to be doing implementation in Game Engine, so we were preparing for that. And then once Pixelbyte got brought on, I think that was early 2022. That part of the gig had lifted, so all we had to do was content, and that was great. And Pixelbyte, like I said, they own this space. They know how to make a great action game for Apple ecosystem. So
cool.
They were super great with, I had a few ideas, more traditional, but nonetheless, like technically, it would require some work to get some of the music system ideas I had up and running. And they were very willing to put some effort into that, into those new features. So there's like, a more, still kind of like traditional, but still an advanced interactive music system to power intensity changes, some transitions, like stem swapping. So like, a few instruments come in and out. I don't know if you heard, there's like a synth and a bass that come in if you're like in a pretty heavy combat sequence in the game. It's not on the actual like soundtrack, but in game, if you're like going in and out of combat, there's like it pumps you up a little bit.
Nice.
So that was a new feature that got built. But like freeing that implementation side up meant that I could level up the music even more than I was planning. I could write more music. I could take it to the studio and hire some folks to help flesh it out. And they just like were so gracious with their time, eager to make the music work as well as it could. Obviously, they were excited too about working on a James Bond game. So, there was eagerness all around. Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Oh, it's so amazing. Yeah, I was curious about if what what hand you had in terms of the sound design and things like that, because of course you are co-owner of SKU Sound. Remind us about SKU Sound, if you would.
Yeah. So, co-owner of SKU Sound, which was founded in 2014. We founded that. It's myself, my colleague Chris Wilson, who I mentioned earlier, who also does music, but he's also a sound designer. He's the one of us that's a bit of a hybrid. And then Dan Crislip and Nick Coleman, who are sound designers. And then around this time, we brought in two other sound designers, Jasmine and Matt. And this was one of their, if not their first big project to support us, to help us with. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was around this time where there were some changes. So we kind of at the end of last year, we got brought into a company called Probably Monsters. SKU Sound did. So we didn't get bought, but we got, effectively like, we're going to book you 100% of your time. So we still have SKU Sound, and we still are working on projects. I'm still working on additional content for Cypher right now, actually. Yep. Nice. So there's an update planned, which I probably shouldn't be talking about, but there's a update that will exist, I think, that is not a secret, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
And then a few other big projects that are still in the works. One of which I'm working with Brent Meyer, who we discussed, had on your show. So me and Brent are working together on something.
Nice.
Yeah, SKU Sound is alive and well.
Yeah.
It's just we're also working on this a couple big things with Probably Monsters.
Cool.
So a lot going on. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. What more do you want to say about 007? Cypher 007.
Yeah, I would check out the game. I think it's a lot of fun. If you're a Bond fan, like it's an easy win. It's just it's not like GoldenEye, and I think if you try and if you wish it was GoldenEye, you'll be disappointed. And it works without having to live up to that.
Oh
idea. It's fun, and it just is James Bond for an the Apple ecosystem. So if you have an iPhone and you have Apple Arcade, it's honestly a no-duh thing. It's great.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I have thoroughly enjoyed playing it, and it looks so good too. In addition to the sound being amazing and everything, but it just looks great. And I remember, of course, the early iterations of games like that years and years ago, and just being kind of clunky, and they've just gotten so good. And
totally. Yeah.
It's so smooth, and yeah, it's really fun little stealth situation. I also endorse.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun playing through the game and enjoying it. It was always fun. As soon as we got the first build through Pixelbyte, it was like, oh gosh, this is this is going to be a breeze, And of course, it's never a breeze, but it was. We knew that we had something that was fun pretty soon, and I really loved the story. I think that anything that has to do with sort of dreaminess and hinting at something on the outside is a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. And so James Bond plus that, I was able to flex my glitchy David Lynch, that side of me, which is kind of present in everything I do. I can't escape it, but to really own it and not be ashamed. It was a lot of fun to do that for James Bond. I still can't believe I don't want to say it's just Apple Arcade, but it does feel like it is, what do you call it? Canon James Bond. I got to work on a canon James Bond thing, which is a little shocking. Oh, wow, cool. That's, and I've always loved, the James Bond universe, cinematic universe and game universe. So to be able to be a part of that, I'm really thankful to Caitlin who brought us in and to the team there. So, yeah.
And then, you mentioned, because I wanted to follow up on that, and I neglected because we went somewhere else, but you mentioned earlier about how it was a little too jazz handsy at the start.
Yeah.
Was that because it was just too big bandy? Were you using the big band in that way? Or were you, what was it? What was that kind of like?
Yeah, I actually have the track pulled up here. I thought maybe I could play it over the phone
that'd be
here.
Amazing.
Yeah, because I think it's funny enough to share with you. It's
okay.
It's not. It's a sketch. I just want to make sure I have my original sound on. Yeah. So that was one of the first sketches I had done, and I was just flexing my muscles and does jazz in James Bond work? It obviously, John Barry is of that tradition, but real swing gonna work, and pretty quickly it was nah, I don't think so. Nah, I think that's all right. So I think what I was able to get away with on this soundtrack, I thought, was the right blend of it's there, it's subtle, and it has some harmonic language of that tradition, but it's not all in. And initially we were let's try all in, and yeah, it was not great.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Because I was well, of course that would work. But then when you think about stealthing around, and stuff,
it was it was kitschy. It's not the right. Yeah, you can do it. And honestly, you listen to that early John Barry stuff, even Dr. No, that era is kitschy.
Yeah.
It has kitschy to it, and that's okay. That's the 60s. It's fine.
Yeah. It was modern for the time, I'm sure, but kitschy now.
Exactly. And they leaned into that intentionally, and that's fine. It's all good. For us, we thought that was going to work. And I think if the game looked that way, if it was trying to be kitschy or just, had a different art style, then maybe that would make sense and it would work fine. But just because it was being presented as more dreamy, more serious, it's still fun, but it does have a cartoon aesthetic to it, but it's not cartoony, if you will. It's still James Bond, classy.
Yep.
So
yeah,
it's more of an homage to that era and less of a reproduction or recreation of those sounds.
Yeah. Well, I loved it. I really did. It's super fun. And, kind of off the record, I told you my experience the first time I encountered it, not having paid attention to it being Bond and could pretty much right away tell it was going to be Bond. That's a win in my opinion.
That for the fans, I was because the fan base of this IP is strong and they care.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do it justice. Like I think the story and the game have done it justice. They've done this IP, a lot of fan service. and sincerity involved. So I wanted to make sure that was evident in the music as well.
Yeah, very much.
Cool.
Well, Steve, do you want to say any more about it, or what you? I mean, you kind of talked a little bit about what you got going on, and stuff,
I mean, there's one other thing I think that I'd like to share with your community.
Please do. Please.
I have an album that I'm releasing soon.
Really?
That's not attached. Well, okay. Let me correct it is not. It wasn't originally attached to a game. It's called DOS, like Digital Operating System, DOS.
Yeah.
And I'm making a video game for it.
Really?
So the album came first. The video game is second. So the game is in support of the album. I was just like, I wanted to release it in some way where it would actually matter in some capacity, because releasing an album in 2023 is, unless you're Taylor Swift, is very difficult. Like, it's just like you have to have a marketing machine behind it, and I'm set up for game soundtracks. I'm not set up for being an artist on a major label. So, and I'm not trying to be that, but so I just wanted to make something that was cool, that maybe when I released it could find a home in people's lives. So this game, DOS, is, sweet and chill and quick, but authentic, and I think true to the music. And so I'll let you know when it gets out there. It hopefully by the end of the year. And it'll be on phones. Probably like Cypher, just the Apple ecosystem. That's my world. So iOS, iPad.
It has been for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember even when you were working at Harmonix, and Harmonix was making the Apple sports game or something,
Beat
weren't
Sports,
they?
Exactly.
Yeah,
we were on stage at one of their big keynotes. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy. So you have been kind of in that world for a while.
Yeah, and I like to develop in Unity on a Mac. That's sort of easy for me. And I have I have an iPhone, and I could just, like, while we're kind of getting ready for bed, reading, I can, instead of reading, I'll start game developing before I go to bed, and just plugging away at it night after night, and it's coming together. So yeah, hopefully I'll have it done soon. I was just releasing, like I said, releasing an album, like any musician knows, is like, unless it's tied to a product, which is funny because we're like, this universe is small, and so this idea, like, for us is like maybe not that big of a deal. But any musician that I talk to in Nashville here, like, that isn't a part of the game world, is like, that's a crazy idea, I want to do that. I'm like, thank you, but it's actually, I don't think you still have to market a game. Like, it's not you're not ridding yourself of that hassle. So I'm probably just making more work for myself than anything else. But I thought you should know,
That's
maybe
awesome.
I'll drop it in the Discord whenever it's ready.
Please do. I can't wait. Cool. I always love hearing new music from you, and it's always a treat. I look forward to that.
Thanks, Emily. Appreciate the support.